Thank you, Bernie. Bernie, we got these ministry things down to 3 minutes. What time is it? I just thought, so we've been working together, and it's just something I had a desire to do is continue ministry, but in a more leisurely manner. So let me take you back for a moment. I made 3 requests of God when I accepted the call to ministry. We really started the ministry on one of the slides. You saw me at a little pond baptizing. That was not here. That was actually in Michigan. And the pond had copperheads in it, and so I would baptize quite a few people that day, and they would come. I'd be watching, keep my eyes open. That's why I pray with my eye open to this day. And so I'm baptizing. I'm watching, and a copperhead's coming across I think not copperhead, water moccasin, coming across the water with his head up. And so I'd smack the water, and he would scurry away. Then I'd baptize another person. And those things, that would not have been fun. But I didn't know I was getting into troubled waters when I did it. But that was Michigan, and we went back there, and we spent a year. Tricia and I actually got married in Michigan. She was born in Brawley, California, and I was born in Adrian, Michigan, and then lived on a little farm called Jasper. And we went back there. I really feel that God was calling me. I knew He was calling to ministry, but I think so often, and you're going to face this in your life, you try to take the path of least resistance. And I thought that the path to Michigan would be the path of least resistance. But after a year or so, this June marks 40 years that I will have been actually in ministry. And I began to pray, God, I will go anywhere in the world that you'll send me. And the Lord said something so clear to me and Tricia. I mean, it was the Holy Spirit speaking. I'm going to send you to a place where there will be a great awakening. And there has never been one there before. And then the Lord began to move me to come here. Now, I didn't know anyone. My wife and I did not know one person. I'd never been here in my life. It was strictly out of the prompting of the Spirit that I came here. And I realized there had never been a revival here during this history of the San Jose area. And so He began to unfold a plan. And I realized as the years would go by that only part of that plan is complete for this church. I feel that part of my job was like David supplying the materials for the building of the temple, and God had designed that the temple would be built by his son Solomon. And I felt God had called me here to establish a place for a habitation for the Spirit of God. And God never told me that I was going to be a part of the awakening, but He did tell me what to do. And I believe that was what I was supposed to do, was to make ready for what is going to yet happen for you. Now, there's 3 requests, and I think it's important you just know something about me. And when I was called into the ministry, I didn't need a job. I mean, it's just like Hector. He doesn't need a job. I mean, he just needs to get everything wrapped up, and I was going through the same thing. And I was a real estate broker at the time, and my brother and I were in business together, and we had all kinds of things going on. But when the Lord called me, I had 3 requests. I said, Lord, don't bless me beyond my capacity to stay loyal to you. Number 2. I'm not going to beg. You would provide, or I'm out of a job. Because if I want to beg, I'll stay in business. And that's what I told him. And then I said, and I want to go out of this world with a clear mind. And that means communicating, awake, Let me take the second one first. I adopted a George Mueller principle regarding finances, money, and faith. And it wasn't easy. But I determined that I was going to be a man of faith and that God would have to provide. He would have to do the work. He would have to bring the funds. And I remember when Doug Weiss was here. He's now a bishop in the Anglican Church, but I invited him here because he was alone. He had the Episcopal Church, and so he would attend my staff meetings every week, and we would go through the life of George Mueller together. He said that from that time up until when he left this area, he was still doing that with the staff. But it was developing principles of stewardship and faith, and it was so important for me at that time. And so whenever I was tempted to ask for money or beg, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't give, you should, and you should support this church. But it was just something in my spirit I had to do. And so through the years, God would work out means to enable us to buy buildings. I even did a little tent making along the way for 4 years as I was preaching every Sunday. So we were able to generate funds, and I just felt like I'd rather make tents than beg. And so God just kept bringing the money in, and he kept blessing, and we kept acquiring the buildings. And I hope to write a book someday on this, mainly because I think it talks of the glory of God and the fire of our adversary, the devil, who tries to stop everything God is doing. And so it took 25 years almost to the month to acquire the last building. And that was, they wanted $9 million when that happened. I'm not going to get into the finances, but I will say this. You're sitting on $40 million worth of real estate, free and clear, and there was never any pressure on you. And it's something to use for the glory of God, because a lot of churches are in trouble financially because they didn't exercise good wisdom when it comes to money and faith. So, number 3, why would I ask God to give me a clear head? Now, this has not come to pass yet. The other 2, I believe, have. You know why I love preaching a lot? Because people can't interrupt me. And it's the one time I can do what I want, say what I want, and people are generally respectful, and when we're not, we remove them. And so, it's been a joy. And so I've told my family all through the years, I've heard so much communication, so much talking. I said, when I die, I am convinced God's going to give me the last word. And that's important. So I've been around many deaths in my lifetime, and I know one person who felt like I did, and he talked right up until the time he left. When he left, he was right in the middle of a sentence. And that's the way it should be. And so since I have watched God work in my life all through the years, even when it comes to real estate, I mean, I didn't want to negotiate these deals. I was tired of all this stuff. And I had this sense, God, he was going to have me negotiate every one of these, and he did. And we tried to get me out of it, and I kept getting thrown back in. And so I can sense a pattern with how God works. I've been walking with him long enough. And so I told the board, I said, you wait and you watch. I'm going to end up dealing with this thing and negotiating with the owners. And so if the pattern's correct, then I'm right. I am going out with a clear head. And you'll hear about it. I guarantee it. All right, number 1. Don't bless me beyond my capacity to stay loyal. You know, over the years, the question I've asked God? Why didn't I ask to have my capacity increased? I thought, why did I limit God in one sense? I said, don't bless me beyond. I never thought about just increasing it. And so I am what I am by the grace of God. I mean, and so probably one thing that annoyed people over the years, I annoyed people a lot. I mean, you know it, I know it. One of my favorite scriptures was, if you want to please men, you can't be called the servant of God. And so I remember standing up one time and said, I may offend all of you, but if I don't offend God, that's more important. And so I probably have offended people along the way, never with intent. But this job, as Hector's going to really discover, is not an easy job, especially when you want to put God first. And you got to put him first. And so, and then this other thing I know annoyed even some of the friends who were fellow ministers. And I associated with other ministers, and I hosted events for them and everything, but my true friendships didn't come outside of this church. My true friendships were born of the Spirit of God right here, and I didn't need other senior pastors to lift me up. I had my church. I had my people, my friends, and that was very important to me. So I came to the place one day, and I think it was the only time I ever cried. And when we got this old shopping center, and I was sitting over here on this side, and we were going to have services for the first time the next morning, and we had gutted this old center. In fact, we sent the doors from the refrigerator, this big freezer, down to my brother, and he put them on a wine cellar. So you talk about using to the glory of God everything you have. I look back on those days, and I'm over here, and I start to cry, and it shocked me because I just certain things I try to make sure I don't do, and it's not always easy, And the elders got real nervous because I've been here a couple of years, they'd never seen me with any emotion, and I couldn't talk. And that went on for about 45 minutes. I'll tell you what happened to me was God told me that he favored me. That was a big deal. So I coined this phrase. Mike Kiley is a man who has found favor with God. And I put it on all the stations. I put it everywhere. And people looked at it and said, how can he say that? I said, because God said it. Because God said it. Psalm 30, verse 5, for his anger is but for a moment, and his favor for a lifetime. Psalm 90:17, let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us. And I had such an overwhelming sense of God's favor that it developed into this consciousness of the fear of God. And I knew that I didn't want to offend God. It was amazing to me. Every Sunday when I got up and preached, and I preached 3 Sunday morning services for years, and 1 Sunday night, Wednesday night, trained leaders on Thursday night, met with elders on Monday night, and did a lot of other things. But I got this sense as I was working, I don't want to offend God. He's huge. I've been hearing that word a lot lately, so I thought I should use it this morning. Because he's huger. And so, that's why I had a hard time when Mario was singing, because it brought back so many memories. And he reminds me, and Tricia, I know, she'll feel the same. Well, we've talked about this. Mario reminds me of my early beginnings. The Spirit of God is upon him, and he's sensitive to the Spirit. And there's something about that. And I always thought that God had called me to be a worshiper, and along the way I began to preach. And of course, anybody that heard me sing denied all that, but I knew it was true. I knew it was true. And so, yeah. So I remember this, Wayne and I had this business partner, Bruce Benson. I finally went to church, and he wouldn't leave me alone until I got saved. But he couldn't stand next to me during the service. What do you do when God calls you to be a worshiper, but you don't have the gifting? You just do it. You do it. And then I began to train men and everyone to minister, and then I teach them how to sing. Can you believe this? And so the wonderful thing is I got every man to sing, and the reason is because they knew if I was willing to do it, they could certainly step out too. So those were those early years. Now, I received something from my son, which I rarely ever get anything from Judah. He just is not that way, But he wrote me something. I got concerned. I said, "Son, it sounds like a eulogy," and I didn't feel I was going anywhere. So I called him up. I'm going to read it to you, and I said, this could be used someday. So he said, finish part 2 of your series in praise. Here's what I noticed. And I think, and that's what reminded me this morning when I was listening to Mario. Because back in 1984, there was just something about the idea of praise and that we can be close to God and walk with God. And to me, it amazes me. To this day, I just enjoy being with God. So he said, finish part 2 of your series in praise. And I always said, why don't you listen to one of my messages sometime? It's almost like we're all over the hill, right? And, we're too old. And so he listened to it. And then he went on and listened to the second one. He said, here's what I noticed. You were very comfortable with the scriptures you used. You were familiar with them and were not approaching them for the first time. You had saturated yourself in the Word during the week as you prepared. Your description of background details was vivid, as if you had been there and wanted the congregation to be there too through your message. You spoke from your experience, as if the things you were speaking about are things you experienced and practice regularly, giving your listener the sense they can do it too. It's practical. The congregation could halah and yada and zamar. Those are Hebrew words. I love the tehalah. They're the high praises. And when you have high praises, the devil can't stand anywhere around it. It probably helped, too, that your worship team saw itself as practicing and modeling the very things you were teaching. The congregation could see and practice what you were preaching. Your stories were pertinent and powerful. You were genuinely excited and enthusiastic. You were funny. I think at the end of the day, the most significant aspect to your preaching is not your presentation style, but the impression you get that this guy enters into the Holy of Holies. He sings from mountains, and in the middle of rivers, he walks with God. The difference between your preaching and so many others is the difference between knowing about God and knowing God. And it has been a thrill. When I came here, it was overwhelming. I was in business in Southern California, went back and started a church in Michigan. I felt that was one of the greatest tests of my pride and building my character. God does not spare any of my money to make me successful. He took it all. And so when I look at it, I had no idea that I was entering into an area where it would become one of the intellectual centers of the world and one of the great financial centers of the world. And I grew up on a farm. I mean, I still know how to milk cows. I mean, I just, it's funny. And then I'd meet with these pastors, and they were PhDs and what have you, and I dropped out of high school and went in the Air Force when I just turned 17. I was 17 years, 2 months, and 11 days, and stayed there 4 years. And so, I did a little stint at a business college that Eric, he knew the college because he was there. He knows that whole area where I was at in Ohio where I went to school, but I only went there a month. And I thought, if I can get this, I can go into business. So I left school and just started working, and so that's the way it's been. I've studied hard. I mean, I all through the years, I gave myself to the study of Scripture. And Tricia will remember probably for 15 years, I'd lock myself up on a Saturday, and I'd come down and eat, and I wouldn't finish if it was 2 a.m, and I'd come here and preach because I said, I'll never get in the pulpit unless I'm fresh. And so I could tell you in the first 20 years of ministry, I didn't do anything on a Saturday night. I could name 5 times probably on my hand. Just wouldn't do it because that was me and God. So the whole idea of Michigan, if I was going back to where I was born, I wouldn't go because I don't like it. I don't like the mosquitoes. I don't like the humidity. I don't like much about it at all. But when my brother, who's been trying to get me to move up north, which is absolutely a beautiful area, Traverse City area, and it just struck me that God was kind of calling me back. He said something to me that I did not remember, but he said, this is where we came when we were kids, and Mom sent us here to a Bible camp. Well, I knew the effect it had on me, but I didn't know it was Traverse City. So you probably had a chance to see this if you get my newsletter, but I'm going to read this. I sent this out as a newsletter. My pastoral ministry makes a 40-year milestone this June, and it is time for me and Tricia to set the course for the next chapter of our lives. Home Church, which we founded in our home in 1978, is being prepared by the Holy Spirit to enter into new adventures of faith with our great God. From our very beginnings, we sought to know God and serve Him in faithfulness. And with the words of the Apostle Paul, we can say, we have fought a good fight, we have kept the faith, and someday we will say, we have finished the great race. Until that time, we will continue to run this race with an increasing faith in the God who cannot fail us. My ministry continues with an emphasis on utilizing the internet to preach the gospel. And then I go in and tell how you can discover what I'm doing. When I was a young boy, my mother sent my brother and sister, along with me, to a Bible camp in Traverse City, Michigan. And it was here that my first real impressions of God were formed. Little did I know that in my older age, I would be returning to the place where my heart was first stirred for the living God. Having experienced God's abounding grace at home church, I came to this revelation some years ago. I am a man who has found favor with God. And this has led me to pray for you, same way. I told him I'd finish at 11:10 or 11:10. It's 11:09, and I do what I say. I want to end with this 30-second clip. You have to have courage. It's going to be tough out there. It was tough on us. We had so much hell in the first 10 years, it's amazing we survived. You got to have faith. God will prove himself in his unfailing faithfulness. He cannot give up on you. You are about to go into the next generation that we started. And I still believe, and I've never doubted this for 1 second, that awakening is coming right here. But you got to have faith and courage. It's not going to be easy. But God cannot fail you. I love you.